for 30 years and is a member of the 150th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry, better known as the Bucktails. So he portrays a private in Company C&K, which was Lincoln's Guard. And some of you probably are familiar with John and his wife Cinda, who's in the back, dressed in her hoops today. So he's going to talk to you about the Civil War and Lincoln and the Bucktails. So please help me welcome John Seitz.
I probably should have added to that I was drafted in 71 and ended up in Fort Hood, Texas from 72, 73. And when my drill sergeant told me I was going to be in the military police, I said, oh no. And I said, I'll never make it through Fort Gordon, Georgia. He said, no, you're going for one-on-job training. So and that was fun. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Civil War, mostly the Bucktails.
Put your mic
Closer. I'll just hold it. There we go.
There you go.
Now, I've never gave this program before, even though I've been with the Bucktails 30 years. Only in the last couple days I started, I better start doing some more research, because basically I speak to 5th and 6th graders, so you got to keep it short. And so, but as we know, the war could have started on January 9th, 1861, when the Star of the West was heading toward Fort Sumter, and the Confederates did fire on it. So the ship did turn around and leave, and so the war did not start, because technically they did not shell American property. It was just a ship. But the war did begin on Friday, April 12, 1861 at 4:30 in the morning, when they fired on Fort Sumter. That basically started the war. We know the war ended on Sunday, April 9th, 1865 at 4 o'clock in the afternoon at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, when the surrender papers were signed. Now, there is two interesting stories, we might say, with the beginning of the war and the end of the war. There was a guy named Wilbur McLean. He had a house at what the first battle would be the First Battle of Bull Run. Cannonball came down his chimney and basically destroyed his farmhouse. He said, I gotta move somewhere safer. So he went to Appomattox Courthouse, and they happened to sign the surrender papers in his house. And now he still had his house, but I don't think there was anything left in the parlor when they left, because I think they even took the curtains for souvenirs. Now, another item, a little bit sadder. I'm a firm believer that was Edmund Ruffin that yanked the lanyard to send the first cannonball toward Fort Sumter. And so you could say he fired the first shot in anger in the Civil War. But he also probably fired the last shot in anger in the Civil War. On June 17, 1865, he writes in his diary, and now what will be near my last breath, I hereby repeat my unmitigated hatred to Yankee roll, to all political and malignant and vile Yankee race. He then shot himself. And the sad thing is, history keeps repeating itself, even today. Now, 5 days later, Pennsylvania basically responds, and on April 14th, 1861, a guy named Thomas Kane, a prominent PA man, an abolitionist, wrote a letter to Governor Curtin, offering to raise a company of horsemen, but the governor replied, we need infantry. Now, as I go on, some of these stories, who knows if they're true or not. Depends who writes them, and you hear a whole bunch of other things which goes on. But Kane proceeded to Smethport, the recruiting effort began, and he was calling out volunteer rifles, and he was after marksmen. He then proceeded to Elk, Cameron, and started raising men, and he got, they said, hundreds. And so the recruiting only took a couple of days, but while at Smethport, opposite the courthouse where Kane had his headquarters, was a butcher shop. What's the guy's name here? James, if I can pronounce his name right, Langergan, noticed a deer hide hanging with the butcher shop, so he went over and cut the tail off, stuck it on his hat. Went back to headquarters, Kane saw it, loved it, and other recruits went back and skunned the deer out, and they cut the hide into triangular pieces, and Kane said, From now on, we are going to be called the Bucktails. And that's basically how the Bucktails got started. These members, the interesting thing is, these guys, when they left the area, they actually rafted down the Allegheny and then headed off toward Harrisburg, probably to Camp Curtin. I don't know if it's going out or not. Oh, there it is. Now, these men were unique, especially because they were mountain men. And so they were very familiar with muskets, which is very unusual in the Army back then. And so they were initially issued Sharps rifles, which was usually only went to the sharpshooters. And so they were basically classified as a sharpshooter regiment of the Reserve Corps. On September 17th, 1862, the original Bucktails, as I would call them, were involved in the Battle of Antietam, or as the Confederates called Sharpsburg. A lot of times the Union would name battles after a landmark, and the Confederates would pick a town. During the battle of the cornfield in the East Woods, they took extremely heavy casualties. Roughly close to 110 dead and wounded, and 93 were actually casualties in one charge alone. So after that battle was over, the military camped along the James River, and a Colonel McNeil of the regiment wrote a letter to the governor of Pennsylvania requesting permission for Major Roy Stone and Captain Langhorne Worcester to return to PA to raise men to help reduce the depleted ranks, basically due to that battle. He also suggested raising a Bucktail Brigade, and so that's how it basically came into existence. So part of the letter that was written, he said, where the Bucktails fought, there was no giving way of our lines, and where the major would bring up his Spartan band, their brigades would reform and hold their positions. The name of Bucktail became a terror to the enemy, and more extended organization would be greatly advantageous to the service. So basically, recruiting began in the state. Roy Stone returned to his counties. Worcester returned to his home city of Philadelphia. And Stone, the men he raised, eventually became the 149th Bucktails. Excuse me, it was also 143rd, but they did wear deer tails as far as I know. At the same time, Henry Heidi Cooper received a commission as captain in the Army, and he too began a recruiting effort in his home county of Crawford County, right here in Meadville, just a little bit up the road. Now, the poster that went out right away was basically stated, Bucktail Brigade, 600,000 men called out. Drafting commences August 15th. H.S. Heidi Cooper has been authorized by General Stone to raise a battalion of 4 companies for the Bucktails. All companies, parts of companies, recruits reporting immediately at Meadville will be provided for, and be sure a place in the Bucktail Brigade. In this now, and receive a bounty of $25. Now, I did look that up. It said spending power, so if you don't know if the computer tells you the truth, that would be equivalent of $800 today, which was a wonderful amount, especially when you realize what else they were getting. Also made mention that they would get 1 month's pay in advance, which I'm not sure what it was then, but roughly it was about, beginning of the war, $13 a month. $75 at the end of the war, and wait not to be drafted into a poorer regiment and receive no bounty. Basically, you did not want to be in the regulars. If you were going to go, you enlisted in a volunteer infantry, because basically you knew everybody in your company, uncles, brothers, friends. You elect your officers, you knew your sergeants and corporals, so it was the way to go. The county will probably give her men $50 apiece. I looked it up to see if Crawford County did give them $50. H.S. Heidi Cooper wished 100 men to form a select company. The battalion will probably receive its arms, etc., immediately and be encamped in Meadville for 4 weeks. All men enlisting in the battalion will be sure of the best care and can have money at all times transferred to their families free of charge. Meadville, Pennsylvania, August 6, 1862. Interesting thing is, it only took 21 days and they got all the men that they needed. So then a flyer went out and it basically said, Bucktails, all men who have enlisted in the Heidi Cooper and Derrickson Company, Reisinger and Shaw's Company, J.B. Fay's Company, or Captain Ziegler's Company must report themselves at Meadville on Monday, September 1st to be readiness to leave immediately for Harrisburg, August 27th, 1862. Now the companies that were formed in the 150th were Company A and B from Philadelphia County, C from Crawford, D from Union County, companies E, F from Philadelphia, Company G from McCain County, and companies H, I, and K from Crawford County. Then from Meadville, they took a train and went to Harrisburg, Camp Curtin, and there on the 4th of September, the regiment was formed under the following officers: Langhorne Wisser from Philadelphia, be Colonel; H.S. Heidi Cooper of Crawford County, Lieutenant Colonel; and Thomas Chamberlain of Union County, Major. And so from there, on September 5th, 1862, their orders were to go to Washington, D.C. They boarded the train and off they went to begin their life in the military, which they thought was going to be short, but it wasn't. As they transferred trains in Baltimore, while walking the streets, they were all reminded of the unpatriotic attacks that were made upon the previous year against traveling soldiers. The air was much more patriotic now, and the receptions was with cheers rather than jeers. Again, history kind of repeats itself when you think about what happened in the Vietnam War. And excuse me if I cough a little bit, my allergies are terrible right now. Now the regiment received orders to report to the Meridian Hill and establish their camp. The command was quickly dispersed throughout Washington, because basically what they would do, they would be guarding warehouses, train depots, and the bridges coming into the city, because the Confederates were on the other side, and so they were that close. Companies C and H were ordered to the soldiers' home where President Lincoln and his family were staying to relieve some of the regulars that were on duty. Now, either by mistake or didn't know where they were going, they ended up going to the Soldiers' Rest, which was near one of the train depots. And so now the president was unguarded, and they said, some reports said, oh, an aide just came to the 150th camp, but you could tell they were panicking because there's nobody there. And so the aide showed up, and so companies D and K were promptly started for the soldiers' home. Now, the interesting thing is, that is the one thing that Company K is known for as they go on, so pay attention. Companies D and K pitched their tents near the grounds of the home and in full view of all the buildings. And for a number of years, we used to reenact that. We would camp on the same grounds right in front of Lincoln's cottage in Washington, so that was it was fun. Their special duty was to guard the premises and look after the safety of the president, whose life was off and on in danger. And you have to understand, the president back then, he would ride horseback from the cottage to Washington, it was about 2 miles away, unescorted. He would walk the streets even up to the end, sometimes definitely unescorted. Now, one of the visitors to camp was Thomas Lincoln, or Tad, and he basically seemed to say he owned the camp, so he was always there. And I don't know if it's a photograph or a drawing, but we do know there is some image of Tad dressed as a bucktail. On the morning of the first day, Captain Dickerson of Company K was invited to breakfast with the president. After that, he rode with him to the White House. The carriage was escorted by, and this is a quote by somebody, an insignificant detail of cavalry from Scott's 900, and they returned that evening. Now, they do have a little slightly derogatory term for that same unit, so I'm not sure what was going on there. Now, supposing that invitation for breakfast was just merely a complimentary introduction to his duty, Captain Derrickson did not report the following morning until the president was ready to start. In the course of the day, the captain was summoned to the mansion and was requested to breakfast daily with the president, which he continued to do so until the family went back to the White House in the fall. According to the captain, he made a practice to enter the president's room a little after 6 in the morning. The president would eat before the family because he had a lot on his mind, and usually found him engaged in reading either the scriptures or some work of art, and the captain would spend the night in the cottage also. So Lincoln was taking a shine to the 150th Company K. Now, during this time, President Lincoln was the first president to visit an active battlefield, which happened in July 1864 at Fort Stevens in Washington, D.C., during which the Confederates were engaged in an assault on the city. And Lincoln was on one of the parapets of the fort, when the sharpshooter decided to target Lincoln, and I said there was a surgeon on his right that got a little distance, got hit. I don't know if it was a surgeon or one of the bucktails, but the person right next to Lincoln got hit, from what I understand, hit in the leg. So that's how close Lincoln was to snipers. And while I'm on my mind, how good some of these snipers are. The Confederacy also had their sharpshooters, and some of these were actually imported musket rifles from England. One was a Wentworth musket. One report says the Confederacy paid $1,000 in gold for one rifle and 1,000 rounds of ammunition, and a cheaper version came out. So this is a Wentworth round. It's a .45 caliber. We do know from records that a sniper at Spotsylvania Courthouse killed General John Sedgwick at 800 yards with a gun like that. Yeah, it was really a perfect shot. So some of those guns were quite accurate, but very expensive back then. When you think a Springfield might have cost, I think it was about $23 back then. When the 150th was ordered to leave Washington, President Lincoln wanted Company K to stay. One of the times we were at the soldiers' home, the organization that runs it actually brought the letter out so we could see it, which is nice. The letter states, Executive Mansion, Washington, November 1st, 1862, to whom it may concern. Captain Dickinson and his company have been with me for some time, keeping guard at my residence, now at the soldiers' retreat. He and his company have been very agreeable to me, and while it's deemed proper for any guard to remain, none would be more satisfactory to me than Captain D and his company. Signed, A. Lincoln. And so when the 150th left, Company K stayed, and they became his official bodyguards until the day he was assassinated. Only problem is, he left the bucktails at their camp. Didn't take nobody with him. But even if he did, John Wilkes Booth may still have gotten through because he was a famous actor. And he went to see the president may have said okay. Now, another thing my understanding is General Grant was supposed to be there, but for some reason, I don't know if it was the missus or not, but he didn't show up. Now, if Grant would have been there, nobody would have got in. So who knows? History would have changed if Grant would have showed up. Okay. From there, the bucktails went off to a couple smaller engagements, but eventually ended up in Chancellorsville. And on February 1863, they left Washington with the 149th and 143rd, which were part of the 2nd Brigade, 3rd Division, 1st Corps. May 2nd, they were not much engaged, but basically stayed in the area at Chancellorsville until June when they marched off toward Gettysburg. Interesting, there's always interesting stories. Now, we don't know if this was the bucktails or not, but the bucktails did mention that it hadn't rained since May, and it was hot. And as they were marching toward the north, they did mention that there was puddles along the way, and that the horses were refusing to drink from. And they even mentioned that there was dead horses and mules by these puddles. And some of the soldiers decided to drink the water anyway, because that's how bad it was. And they said simply, they regretted it. So, back then, if you got diarrhea really bad, you did die. Now, Gettysburg. General Meade was now in charge of the Union Army. The Confederates under Heath and Pender's division under A.B. Hill's corps were also coming into Gettysburg at this time from the west. The 150th came onto the battle near Gettysburg about 11 o'clock in the morning on July 1st, 1863. They were on the main roads, but they diverted them and they started cross country to get to what we know as McPherson's Ridge. They halted in front of the cemetery, and there they dropped their packs, because usually in battle, your backpacks are going to get in the way. And more than likely, they didn't retrieve them, so the Confederates probably got them all. They moved forward about a half a mile to a position behind the crest of the hill, and on the right, near a large barn. On their left was the Iron Brigade, and some will remember that's where General Reynolds got was mortally wounded and eventually he died. They found the ground was gently rolling, open, and the only shelter being a slight fence, which that fence has been reconstructed, so that fence is there, a little pond in front of the barns there. The only thing it's not is the McPherson's house. I'm not sure when that disappeared quite a while ago. Now the enemy began showing their position, because you have to understand that where the bucktails were, there was high ground behind them, but they're slightly down in a valley. They would continue further to what basically was Willoughby Run, but we call it today on the opposite side, Hers Ridge, and that's where the Confederates were, and they did have the high ground, so they did have excellent positioning for cannon fire. So the enemy began shelling their positions. Eventually here I'm going to switch to first person just to go from whoever wrote this at the time. They opened up a new battery on the 150th right flank and began enfilading fire. The right flank was exposed. Now the new Confederate Wentworth rifled cannon, which was from England, came into play. And it's my understanding that this cannon could fire a shot 2 to 3 miles so they could see their target. So it was a nasty cannon. But luckily, even though not for these guys, it disabled killed 2 and disabled 3 in Company C. They then switched their position to the barn to use the barn as shelter. But now the 150th was alone on McPherson's Ridge. Now the 149th and 143rd were now established along the Dugout Road, which today that's Route 30. And so they're kind of along our right flank up Route 30 a little bit. And I think, even though it didn't mention it, they were over by the railroad cut also. So they were forming a right angle basically to the 150th, which now fronted westward, so now they're facing toward McPherson's, Hers Ridge, I should say. The enemy continued shelling our position to about 2 in the afternoon without, however, disabling more than 10 or 12 men, but losing 10 or 12 men is still a lot. Company B, Captain Jones, which had been sent forward as skirmishers, was meanwhile actively engaged in our front, sustaining considerable loss. At this time, Colonel Stone, commanding the regiment, having gone forward to reconnoiter, was hit in the hip and the arm by 2 balls from the enemy skirmishers and was carried off the field to the barn. Colonel Wister then assumed command of the brigade, and Lieutenant Colonel Heidi Cooper the regiment. Now, I'm going to be getting to the flags in a couple minutes here, but I'm not sure which, there was a command given, but I'm not sure exactly when it was given. But soon a strong force of rebel infantry advanced from the north on our right, and we then charged front forwards so as to come in line with the other regiments of the brigade. This movement was rapidly accomplished, though through heavy fire. The enemy was now within 50 yards, and we understand that they're just standing there looking at each other, firing at 50 yards apart. Hard to imagine. But the 150th said they assumed staggered by our fire, and they halted and started to retreat, but then a new line of rebels was seen approaching from the west against our left at a distance of a half a mile. And Colonel Wister ordered a charge. I'm going to go into the 149th for a little bit, but that charge I think is important because our 150th Bucktails flag has a very interesting story. This movement was entirely successful. The enemy, who had suffered terribly from our fire, gave way and at once fled in confusion. Danger of injuring their own troops now being removed, the rebel batteries opened up upon us with terrible effect, and the infantry fire from the line advancing upon our left became very severe. In view of this, Colonel Wister gave orders to change fronts to the rear, which basically was about face, and they basically had headed back to their original position, what's up by the barn. So during this time, they're down closer to Willoughby Run. This movement was successful, but with a terrible loss. Now, during this time, the colors of the 150th had been placed a little distance to draw the enemy's fire, and had been captured by them. during that initial attack that the rebels did, but a company of the 150th countered, and they actually got the flag back for the 149th. 149th then reinforced us on our new line, and we were in position none too soon as the advancing lines of the rebels were soon upon us. Our men were partially sheltered by a port and rail fence, and you see a port and rail fence, it's not much of a shelter, but I guess if it stops a musket ball, it's better than nothing. After retreating a short distance, they moved off to their right flank and fixed themselves in the thick woods in front of the Iron Brigade. Colonel Whistler was wounded in the face during his encounter, but he did not leave the field. He eventually had to because of the loss of blood, and I think they said his face and neck were starting to swell up. Now, no charge was made this time. This is roughly about 2:45 in the afternoon. But the artillery from the Confederates kept up, but there was no charge there for a while. During this time, Colonel Heidi Cooper was severely wounded in the arm, which had since been amputated, but this time he's still in the field. He also was hit, I think, in the leg also. But he was treated slightly in the barn, but we do know he actually supposedly took a strap off his horse, tied his arm back into place, and continued giving orders till the loss of blood was too much for him. He had to be evacuated. Now, Adjutant Ashurst was wounded in the shoulder. Lieutenant Perkins in the thigh. Lieutenant Chancellor had his leg almost torn off by solid shot. Now, the flag of the 150th is perhaps one of the most interesting stories out there when you understand what's going on. Sometime during the battle, Company D, which was the color company, was ordered forward to encourage the men. But you have to understand, if the 150th is there, the entire company had about 900 men. They're probably facing 900 men. When the flag goes forward, the enemy's 900 men now aim at the flag and the people carrying it. When those soldiers were given the order, they knew one thing was going to happen. They were going to die. But they did it anyway. When they began to charge forward, the problem is all the Confederate musketry is now faced at them. Color Sergeant Samuel Pfeiffer was shot dead while carrying the state color. And the thing is, he didn't go down immediately. According to report, he lay there waving the flag in defiance at the Confederates. Now, there's two conflicting stories here, and I think they try to base it where Confederate General A.P. Hill was stationed. So it could have been the 149th color bearer, or maybe the 150th color bearer, but it's still both color bearers were killed. He basically wrote, expressed such a regret at the death of so brave a man. Now, the sole surviving member of the Guard was Corporal Joseph, if I can pronounce his name, Guttius, or something like that. He seized the banner and was quickly wounded. He kept the flag. He did make it into town. He stopped at a house, and the house still exists. But the guy was shot and killed, and this was credited to a Lieutenant F.M. Harney of the 14th Carolina. Soon after, Harney was mortally wounded, and his dying request was that the captured color be presented in his name to President Jefferson Davis. Davis did accept the 150th flag from North Carolina Governor Vance, and Davis actually wrote what an honor it was to receive it, and he did keep that flag. And when he evacuated Richmond, one of the things he did do was pack that flag in his luggage. And when he was captured, dressed as a lady, they found our flag. Now, I guess it was given back to Pennsylvania in 1869 after urging the former Secretary of War, Cameron. So, but there is a little piece of it up in the Baldwin Reynolds because Colonel Heidi Cooper did take a chunk out, and so we still have a piece of it. Not long after 3 p.m., our whole line began to give way. Our brigade, however, had no further orders to retreat and continued to hold its ground for some time when finding ourselves almost surrounded by the enemy. we advanced fell back slowly under a severe fire. The Iron Brigade had already fallen back sometime before ours and had formed a new line on the crest of the next ridge, midway between the seminary and the front. Here we halted again and withstood the enemy's attack for some time, but the line giving way on all sides, finding ourselves, basically the 150 was getting surrounded. And so during their retreat, they actually had to stop because part of their cannon battery was still trying to limber up, and they were trying to stop the Confederate advance. So the 150th did stop so they could get limbered up, get the horses on, and get the cannons the heck out of there. But the problem is now by the time they got back into Gettysburg, now they're completely surrounded, and a lot of the 150th did get captured at that time. After this, they arrived at the cemetery where we formed, and they rested in the line during the night. Now, before this part, there's another interesting story about one of the residents of Gettysburg. The story goes, soon after taking up our line in the orchard, an old gentleman approached us from the direction of town, dressed in a blue swallowtail coat, high silk hat, rather worse for wear, carrying a musket, and asked if he could be allowed to fight with our company. And so the person answered, let's ask the colonel. And so the colonel asked, can you shoot? And he said, oh yes, said the old gentleman. Where are your cartridges? And he slapped his pantaloons and said, they're here. And so the colonel agreed, and he said, wish there was more people like you to fight. But he told the old guy to go into the woods where there's more protection, and he actually probably fought with the Iron Brigade. And history preserved the memory of old John Burns that fought with asked if he could fight. The story says that he fought heroically, and he was wounded in the side, the leg, and left insensible on the field. But somebody found him, he took him home, and as of this writing, he was 80 years old. So, now on the second day, on the following day, was the second day, they were held in reserve near Cemetery Hill. But at night, they and the 149th went out to rescue 2 pieces of artillery and 4 caissons, so they did rescue that and bring them back to the Union lines. As even said that one of our pickets was talking to a wounded Confederate soldier from Florida, and his officers actually told him that you have to fight hard, not get wounded, because if Pennsylvania troops catch you, they are going to kill you. And the thing is, if you understand that, that still happens in war today, but from the enemy. So it's interesting that things do not change through time. Now the third day, the 150th was at Pickett's Charge, slightly east of the high water mark. The Union was under severe fire from artillery starting at basically around 1 p.m. under Confederate Colonel Edwin Alexander, which was a very young guy, but a brilliant artillerist. Basically opened up with up to maybe 75 cannon. The Union answered with about 180 cannon, and it did say that in Pittsburgh, it did sound like rolling thunder, that they could actually hear the cannon barrage. Now the 150th was held in reserve when the enemy made their last attack. Some say they didn't, but according to a lot of what I've read, the 150th did contribute toward the end of Pickett's charge by firing on the enemy. Now one of the interesting things is when you understand, when I was a kid, I lived in the eastern part of the state, we took a field trip to Gettysburg. There, I remember going into a store, which was probably today the future horse soldier, if you've ever been there. And I was amazed at the bins of bullets. But the 2 bins that I was impressed with, one bin had, I don't know how many, were 2 bullets that collided in the air. What really impressed me was the next bin over had 3 and 4 bullets that had collided in the air. And that's what these guys were walking into. It didn't matter if you were Union or Confederate. But you can consider the Confederates at Pickett's Charge, they came out at 1 mile. Artillery, now, set the stage a little bit, the Confederate artillery, I think, fired too many of their cannons at one time for effect, and most of their rounds went into the reserves. And so through the smoke, their commander thought they were hitting the front line, so they weren't. They actually did hit nothing. Well, except for the guys in the back. And so basically, if you can see your target at 1¼ miles, the artillerymen are going to hit it. One shot for effect, and even if you're walking, it might take them 3 shots, but almost on the second shot, they are going to hit you. And so as these guys came out of the woods, they opened up with long-range artillery. As they came across midway, somewhere around 600 yards, they would open up with short-range artillery, which would be solid round balls, exploding round balls. And just so you know, a British officer, I think in 1880 something, invented the exploding cannonball. His name lives on forever. His name was, I think, Henry Shrapnel. So, always love that story. And so they opened up with that, but the nasty stuff was canister. And when you see a lot of the relics, and some I'm going to go over with here if I have time, nasty stuff. And when you see what's on display, most of that probably was because of canister. And one shot, probably at 600 yards, if I put my arms like this, it's designed to take most of you out with one shot. And just imagine cannon after cannon after cannon, firing canister, double canister, triple canister. And some of this canister has 72 ball bearings in one. And so we think of Armistead, he made it to a high water mark. Tremendous act of bravery to know what his men went through. And it's sad he didn't survive, but he was mortally wounded. And the nice thing is, a friend of his on the Union Army side was with him. And so there's lots of stories like that. Now, during the battle, the regiment, which would be our four companies from Crawford County, went into battle with 17 officers and 400 men. 43 were killed, 138 wounded, and 69 taken prisoner. And so it was a hard day for the Bucktails. Colonel Henry Heidi Cooper did get the Medal of Honor for his leadership as Lieutenant Colonel, refusing to leave his regiment, even being wounded twice during the fight on McPherson's Ridge. J. Monroe Reisinger also got the Medal of Honor for his special bravery and meritorious conduct while serving as color corporal, defending the flag despite being wounded 3 times. And I think there's more to that story. I think he actually did some other things too. Now, winding down. Other battles that the Bucktails were in was Pollock Mills, Chancellorsville, the Wilderness, Laurel Hill, Spotsylvania, North Anna, Bathsheba Church, People's Farm, Cold Harbor, Petersburg, Hatcher's Run, Weldon Railroad, Yellow House, Dabney's Mills, and they ended their service guarding prisoners in Elmira, New York, at the prison camp there. The battle created 51,000 casualties. They fired or lost both sides 7 million rounds of pistol and musket ammunition. On both sides, 55,000 rounds of artillery shells were fired or lost. The Union, during this after the battle, picked up of 12,000 muskets that they picked up, almost most of them had at least 2 rounds in them, and that's from panicking. One of them, I had to lay my musket out and start laying bullets up along it. They actually found one that had 23 rounds loaded in it, and that's the panic these guys are in. And you can imagine your ramrod keeps getting higher and higher and higher. You just imagine the fear or the panic that's in them, now they even realizing the musket's not going off. Now, according to records, now some say, soldiers would say it would take the weight of a man in lead to hit one Confederate soldier. Another one wrote, it said 900 pounds of lead to hit one Confederate soldier. Now the military wrote about 1,000 rounds to hit one Confederate soldier. But if you think about it, World War II, 45,000 rounds to kill one enemy. And they said 55,000 rounds to kill one during the Vietnam War. And so lots of ammunition gets spent. And if you think of the war, the Civil War, I'm going to round these off. Revolutionary War, 4,400 casualties. War of 1812, 2,200. Mexican War, 13,000, almost 300. Spanish-American War, 2,500. World War I, 116,500. World War II, 405,400. Korean War, 36,000, almost 600.
Vietnam War, 58,200. Middle East, this is probably a low number, about 5,000 with a total of 6,400, 6,433,950 casualties. Civil War, updated a couple years ago, 750,000. And so, and the sad part is that was on our soil. Civilian losses, about 50,000, and that's probably southern cities that were under siege. And this is usually where the girls in classes go, oh. Horses and mules, 1 million to 1.4 million killed. Now, even though the war was over 160 years ago, some of the relics that I pick up, and I hated history growing up, but when you look at some of these relics, the stories they tell, and they're sad. One like this. It's a bayonet curved. Now you have to imagine, if you're a soldier, it's a hot July day, you know what a deer looks like along the road that's dead. Your job is to remove bodies. Now, these could be used for taking hot pans off a campfire, but hooked to your musket, you could hook a strap and you could drag a body because you do not want to be anywhere near that thing. And so, sad stories with things like this. This is a set of scales. It would have been right here on the shoulder. Basically, early war, last part we'll call armor like the military wore. And basically to protect your shoulder from a sword blow. Whoever was wearing that got hit here. Probably from something exploded in the air. A wound like that, you do not survive. So who's ever wearing that was probably taken to an aid station, put up against a tree, given some water, somebody probably sat with him until he died. And that's the sad part of things like this. Or some people might look at these. 2 melted bullets, never fired. They are from the Battle of the Wilderness. One is a Union round, one is a Confederate round. And those who study history know that the artillery barrage started a major forest fire. Soldiers could not get out, especially the wounded. So whose ever ammunition pouches these were in, hopefully they got out. If not, soldiers did write about hearing their screams in the forest, and there's nothing they can do about it. And when you understand canister, the saddest relics you can find on the battlefield are these. These are wedding bands. And as you know, they do not come off that easily. And so chances are, and these are very common relics on the battlefield. The only way you lose something like this if you walk in the canister. At Gettysburg, soldiers wrote about pink clouds on the battlefield. That's what happens when you get close to a can of canister with 72 ball bearings in it. This is what's left. And that's what makes, it kind of brings, even though it's a past history, it brings it to life. Now, the last thing I have, I think I wrote it down here somewhere. I hope I did. There it is. After the war, like I said, military records showed that 1,000 rifle shots took to kill or hit one Confederate soldier. General Ambrose Burnside wrote, out of every 10 soldiers who are perfect in drill and manual of arms, only one knows the purpose of the front sight of a musket. They cannot hit the broadside of a barn at 100 yards. And that, he's talking about the 2 great big barn doors. So he called one out for an organization, an article in the Army Navy Journal by 2 Union Army veterans, Colonel Church and George Wingate. Their primary motivation was concern over poor marksmanship absorbed among Union soldiers during the Civil War. Goals: to promote and encourage rifle shooting on a scientific basis, improve the shooting abilities and discipline of American civilians and the militia, believing better firearm training would benefit the military and the general population, and create a dedicated practice ground for marksmanship training. So November 17th, 1871, with General Burnside as the first president, the NRA was formed. And so that was the National Riflemen's Association. And just to basically improve soldiers' shooting, and at the same time, Americans got the benefit from it. With that, thank you. Oh, I will say, one of the things that I do like to carry with me, about 25 years ago, I bought from an auction, I heard somebody fancy bayonet, this bayonet. It actually fits my musket better than my reproduction bayonet does. A soldier picked this up on the Battle of Gettysburg, brought it home to Massachusetts. And so a lot of soldiers do like to carry things from the past, so this is what I carry to honor the soldiers that when I do a reenactment.